I was handed a $3,500 fine for fishing legally in my own lake. It was a blatant power play by our HOA president, and that smug smile she wore told me everything. She thought she had absolute control. What she didn't know was that I had the resources and the principle to fight back on a scale she never saw coming. This is how I bought our HOA's entire water supply. Saturday morning, 9:15 a.m., and I'm standing on my dock with a fishing rod and what I thought was going to be a peaceful weekend. The water was like glass, reflecting those ridiculous fountains the clubhouse kept running, even during drought advisories. Then I heard the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. I knew that walk. It was Wendy Clark, HOA president, flanked by her board members, clutching a clipboard like a weapon. Mason Brooks. I need to issue a citation for environmental damage. $3,500. I argued. I showed her my permit. But she didn't care. The rule was whatever she said it was. And as I walked away, fine in hand, I saw it. The community fountains blasting water 20 feet into the air during a county drought advisory. The hypocrisy was stunning. And in that moment, a plan began to form. If she wanted to play games with power, I was about to change the game completely. I'd paid my annual fishing fee like always, had my receipt tucked in my tackle box, and was casting into the same spot I'd fished for 15 years without a single complaint. The weathered sign by the boat ramp clearly listed the hours I was fishing within. The sign they'd put up themselves 3 years ago and never bothered updating. Environmental ordinance supersedes all fishing permits, she'd said, handing me that expensive-looking paper. Pay or face court action. I walked away, that paper burning a hole in my hand, and that's when I saw it. The irony was so loud it was deafening. They were fining me for environmental damage, while those obscene fountains pumped thousands of gallons into the air during a drought. That's when the shift happened. This wasn't about a fine anymore. It was about control. And I decided then, and there I was going to take it. Comment below if your HOA has ever hit you with an outrageous fine. Tell me your wildest HOA fine story and what you wish you had done about it. So I started digging, and what I found changed everything. Buried in a business listing site was my golden ticket, Lakeview Dam Company, for sale. Owner motivated. My heart stopped. This wasn't just a company. It was the source of all her power. And it was for sale. I pulled out my phone and started typing into the search bar, Community Water Systems, who controls fountains, lake water management. My boat shop had just finished its best year ever, $180,000 in revenue. The insurance settlement from last year's commercial pier accident had finally cleared. $85,000 sitting in my personal account, plus the business credit line I'd gotten approved for last month for equipment purchases. $100,000 available. For the first time in my life, I actually had serious money. Real money. The kind of money that could buy more than just new tools and inventory. I called the number immediately. Commercial Property Solutions. This is Jennifer. Hi, I'm calling about the Lakeview Dam Company listing. Is it still available? There was a pause. Probably checking her computer system. Yes, it's still available. The owner, Grant Moore, is very motivated to sell. Are you a qualified buyer? I believe so. What's the asking price? $325,000, but the owner has indicated flexibility for the right buyer with quick closing capability. I hung up and stared at that fine again. $3,500 for fake environmental violations. Well, if Wendy wanted to play games about environmental responsibility, maybe it was time someone showed her what real environmental control looked like. They wanted to fine me for fishing. I'd buy their entire water supply. I walked back to the house, fine still crumpled in my fist, and found Laura in the kitchen making coffee. Honey, I said, trying to keep my voice casual. How do you feel about me buying a dam company? She nearly dropped the coffee pot. What are you talking about? I smoothed out that citation and laid it on the counter next to her morning newspaper. They want to fine me $3,500 for fishing legally. I found out who controls their precious water features. I showed her the business listing on my phone. What I discovered about the seller would change everything I thought I knew about this community. By Monday morning, 2 of my biggest boat maintenance contracts had been canceled. Environmental concerns, they said, like I'd been dumping motor oil directly into the lake instead of fishing with a legal permit. That's when I realized this wasn't just about one fine. This was a coordinated attack on my reputation, my business, everything I'd built over 15 years in this community. Wendy wasn't just being petty. She was trying to destroy me economically. I drove out to the dam facility on Tuesday afternoon. It sat on the north shore of the lake, a modest concrete structure that didn't look like much from the outside, but I'd done enough marine maintenance to recognize sophisticated equipment when I saw it. This wasn't some rinky-dink operation. This was a legitimate utility company with serious infrastructure. Grant Lohr met me at the gate, a tall, weathered man in his late 60s with calloused hands and tired eyes. "You're the one interested in buying?" he asked, shaking my hand with a grip that said he'd worked with his hands his whole life. "That's right," I said. "I understand the business has been on the market for a while." Grant nodded and unlocked the facility gate. 8 months now. Most people hear dam company and think it's more complicated than it is. Really, we just manage water flow for decorative systems. Every fountain you see, every sprinkler head in the common areas, every decorative stream that winds through the neighborhoods, all controlled from here. He led me to the control room, and I felt like I was looking at the nerve center of something much bigger than I'd realized. Banks of switches, flow meters, and pressure gauges, all connected to a system that managed water for the entire community. "The infrastructure is solid," Grant continued. "Maintenance contracts are all current. County relationships are good. Well, mostly good." His face darkened a bit when he said that last part. "That HOA president, Wendy Clark, she's been calling me twice a week demanding I violate drought restrictions for her events, garden club meetings, board social gatherings. Always wants the fountains running full blast and the landscaping looking perfect for her photo opportunities." He touched his chest absently. "Doctor says stress is triggering heart episodes. That woman's harassment is literally making me sicker every day. She's the one who hit me with a $3,500 fine," I said, pulling out the crumpled citation, "for fishing legally during hours that are clearly posted as acceptable." Grant's eyes widened when he saw the amount. $3,500 for fishing. He shook his head. "She complains about tight budgets while demanding expensive water displays for her events. Says her maintenance contractor needs immediate payment for projects I've never seen completed." He was being driven out by the same woman who was trying to destroy me. We had a common enemy. And what he told me next about her financial demands would be the key to everything. "Here's the thing," Grant said, leaning against the control panel. "I've been asking $325,000, but honestly, I'd take that amount just to get away from her harassment. My cardiologist wanted me to retire yesterday, and dealing with her demands is the opposite of stress reduction. She threatens county complaints whenever I refuse her special requests during drought periods," Grant continued. "Last month, she demanded I shut off the drought restrictions for her garden club photo shoot. When I explained that it would violate county water conservation orders, she said she'd find safety violations in my records. The harassment pattern was becoming clear. Wendy used intimidation and threats to get her way. And when that didn't work, she escalated to official complaints and financial attacks. She tried the same playbook on both of us. Laura came with me for the second meeting on Wednesday. As our shop's bookkeeper, she wanted to review the financial records herself. Grant spread out 3 years of profit and loss statements, maintenance records, county inspection reports, and customer contracts. "The numbers are solid," she said after an hour of reviewing everything. "Steady income, manageable expenses, and the infrastructure is in excellent condition." She looked at me with an expression I'd seen before, the one that meant she was calculating risks and finding them acceptable. "If we're going to do this, the math works." Grant seemed relieved to be dealing with buyers who understood both the technical and financial sides of the operation. "I inherited this from my father," he said. "Been running it for 22 years, never had a serious complaint until that woman took over the HOA board. Now she calls my house at night, sends her husband to check on the facility, and files anonymous complaints about response times." He pulled out a folder thick with correspondence. "I've documented everything, thinking I might need it someday." That evening, Laura and I sat at our kitchen table with the purchase agreement spread out between us. It's a big step, she said, but the business fundamentals are sound, and frankly, owning critical infrastructure might be the only way to stop her harassment. I signed my name on the signature line and wrote a check for $25,000 as earnest money. Grant had agreed to owner financing for the balance, keeping the monthly payments reasonable while giving him the retirement exit he needed. The county would need to approve the ownership transfer, a process Grant estimated would take about 60 days. But for the first time since receiving that outrageous citation, I felt like I had a path forward that didn't involve lawyers or backing down. The community meeting was packed, standing room only, which should have been my first warning that Wendy had been busy spreading her version of events. I walked into that meeting ready to defend myself. I had no idea I was walking into a perfectly laid trap. Wendy had prepared a full multimedia presentation. Professional slideshow, printed handouts, even a projection screen she'd somehow convinced the community center to set up. Ladies and gentlemen, she began. We're here to discuss a serious environmental threat to our lake ecosystem. She clicked to her first slide, a photo of what looked like severe erosion damage to the shoreline. This is the kind of damage we're seeing from unauthorized fishing activities during protected spawning periods. The photo was compelling. I'll give her that. It showed torn up vegetation, muddy water, and clear signs of environmental disturbance. It was also complete nonsense. I recognized that shoreline damage from last spring's severe storm system. The county had even issued a report about weather-related erosion impacts on local waterways, but Wendy presented it as evidence of fishing-related environmental destruction, complete with arrows pointing to areas she claimed showed repeated unauthorized access. She had documentation that looked official, testimony that sounded scientific, and a presentation that would have impressed me if it hadn't been targeting me specifically. The level of preparation was honestly disturbing. We've consulted with environmental experts, Wendy continued, clicking to a video screen. A middle-aged man in a generic office setting began speaking about spawning habitat disruption and fishing impact on local ecosystems. Generic talking points about environmental protection that could have applied to any body of water anywhere in the country. I pulled out my phone and did a quick search while he was talking. Sure enough, the exact same expert presentation was available for download from a template website that sold stock environmental content to HOA boards. The community was eating it up. Neighbors I'd known for years were nodding seriously, taking notes, asking concerned questions about lake protection. When Wendy opened the floor for discussion, hands shot up immediately. How do we prevent this kind of damage in the future? What legal actions can we take? Should we consider banning fishing entirely? The manipulation was masterful and absolutely infuriating. She turned my legal fishing activity into an environmental crisis requiring immediate community action. I finally got recognized to speak. This is all fabricated, I said, standing up with my fishing permit and photos of the actual regulation sign. I have a valid annual permit. I fish during posted legal hours, and that erosion damage is from the storm system last spring, not from fishing. I tried to show the photos on my phone, but Wendy interrupted immediately. Environmental protection overrides fishing permits when spawning habitat is at risk. The evidence speaks for itself. She gestured to her slideshow as if it were peer-reviewed scientific research instead of downloaded templates and mislabeled storm damage photos. The vote wasn't even close. 52 to 11 to permanently ban repeat environmental offenders from lake access pending resolution of outstanding violations. They specifically named me in the resolution, which would be filed with the county and become part of the permanent community record. I looked around the room at people I'd helped, neighbors I'd shared beers with. And one by one, they raised their hands to ban me. My stomach sank. It was a witch hunt, and I was the only one who could see it. During her closing remarks, Wendy mentioned recent investments in community infrastructure and ongoing projects to improve our environmental stewardship. She rattled off budget numbers for security improvements, landscaping upgrades, and water management enhancements. I looked around the room for visible signs of these investments and saw nothing. The same old landscaping, same old security setup, same old everything. Where exactly had all this money gone? That night, I called Grant and told him I was ready to move forward with the purchase immediately. They destroyed my reputation with fake environmental evidence. I said, they banned me from the lake where I fished legally for 15 years. This isn't about one citation anymore. This is about systematic harassment and abuse of power. Grant was quiet for a long moment. Son, if you're doing this for revenge, the county might not approve the transfer, but if you're doing it because someone needs to operate that facility properly and legally, that's different. It's about justice, I told him. They fine me for fishing while wasting water on vanity landscaping. They present fake evidence while claiming to protect the environment. They vote to ban residents based on lies while talking about community investments nobody can actually see. You know what? He finally said, I've been trying to sell to the right buyer for months. Someone who understands water management. Someone who will run it by the book. Someone who won't cave to her pressure. Maybe you're exactly who this facility needs. The next morning, I drove to Grant's office with a cashier's check for $25,000. We signed the purchase agreement with a closing date contingent on county approval of the ownership transfer. Laura came with me, and she handled the financial paperwork with the kind of attention to detail that made me glad I'd married someone smarter than me. If we're risking everything on this, she said, we're going to do it right. The county review process would take 60 days, but Grant was confident about approval given my marine maintenance background and the facility's clean inspection record. Driving home with a copy of that signed purchase agreement felt surreal. 3 days ago, I was a boat shop owner who just wanted to fish peacefully on weekends. Now I was potentially buying the company that controlled every decorative water feature in my community. That $3,500 fine just became the most expensive mistake Wendy ever made, I told Laura. She squeezed my hand and said, let's make sure we can prove it. The community reaction to news of the pending purchase was immediate and polarized. Some neighbors were curious, others were concerned, and a few were openly supportive. Maybe now someone will listen to the rest of us, said Mrs. Henderson from down the street. But the HOA board was clearly panicking. Within hours of the county filing becoming public record, I received a certified letter demanding I appear at an emergency board meeting to explain my intentions regarding community water infrastructure. What they didn't realize was that I'd been documenting everything since that first bogus citation. Every conversation, every meeting, every piece of correspondence. Laura had been researching public records and found that Wendy had filed formal complaints with the county about Grant's response times to her requests. A pattern of harassment that would make interesting reading for the county officials reviewing my purchase application. The county assessor, who came out to tour the dam facility, was exactly what you'd expect from a government engineer. Thorough, methodical, and completely unimpressed by political drama. Nice operation, he said, walking through Grant's control room and reviewing the maintenance logs. Clean safety record, current certifications, good relationship with county water management. He spent 3 hours examining equipment, checking documentation, and asking technical questions that Grant and I could both answer competently. Ownership transfer shouldn't be complicated for a qualified buyer. What surprised me was how quickly word of the county visit spread through the community. By that evening, I'd received calls from 3 different neighbors asking about my intentions and whether the water supply was secure. The panic was subtle but unmistakable. People were suddenly very concerned about the continuity of service for their decorative fountains and perfectly manicured landscaping. The same community that had voted to ban me from the lake was now worried I might have control over their water features. Wendy's response was more direct. She appeared at the county offices the next morning demanding to speak with whoever was handling my application. I know this because the county clerk mentioned it when I came in to submit additional paperwork. The HOA president was here earlier. She said casually, seemed very concerned about infrastructure coordination. She mentioned something about coordinating with the new utility owner on projects. What projects? I had no idea what projects she was talking about, and apparently neither did the county, which was interesting. The 60-day review process gave me time to learn the technical side of dam operation from Grant. Water flow management, pressure regulation, seasonal adjustments, and emergency procedures. It was more complex than I'd expected, but not beyond what I'd learned from years of marine maintenance. The legal side was simpler. Operate safely, maintain proper records, coordinate with county drought restrictions, and respond to legitimate service requests. Nothing in the regulations required me to violate water conservation orders for garden club photo shoots or social events. Grant's motivation for selling became clearer during our training sessions. My doctor has been concerned about my blood pressure, he said simply. He showed me a folder full of correspondence from Wendy demanding schedule changes, extended operation during drought advisories, and immediate response to non-emergency requests. She acts like paying HA dues makes her the owner instead of a customer. The county environmental assessment took longer than expected. They brought in a biologist to evaluate the impact of the dam operation on local fish populations, which was ironic considering my original citation had been for supposed fishing-related environmental damage. The biologist's report was thorough and completely vindicated both the dam's operation and legal fishing activities. No evidence of environmental impact from current operations or authorized fishing. The report concluded the lake ecosystem is healthy and well-maintained. Week 8 of the review process, the county inspector recommended approval. Qualified buyer, clean operation, proper procedures followed. He told me over the phone. We should have final approval within the next 2 weeks. That's when things got interesting. The next day, I received a call from Grant. The county called me. He said they want to clarify some questions about HOA infrastructure coordination. Apparently, Wendy had been telling the county about various water improvement projects that required utility company coordination, but when pressed for details, she couldn't provide permits, contractor information, or clear project descriptions. My boat shop was bleeding customers. 3 more contracts were canceled that week, all citing concerns about environmental responsibility or reputation issues. My livelihood was under attack. She wasn't just coming for my peace. She was coming for my business, my income, everything my family had built. The financial pressure was real, but it also clarified my motivation. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about survival. If I didn't stop Wendy's campaign against me, I'd lose everything I'd worked for. Laura spent that week diving into public records and HOA documentation. Look at this, she said one evening, spreading out financial statements and meeting minutes across our dining room table. Wendy keeps mentioning budget allocations for infrastructure improvements and utility coordination, but when you cross-reference with actual expenditures, the numbers don't add up. She showed me budget line items for thousands of dollars in water system enhancements and landscape irrigation upgrades that didn't correspond to any visible improvements in the community. The pattern was becoming clearer. Wendy wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president. She was potentially skimming money from community funds through fabricated projects and inflated contractor costs. The fake environmental crisis around my fishing citation was probably a cover for financial irregularities she was desperate to keep hidden. Someone asking too many questions about water management might uncover discrepancies she couldn't explain. Grant called me on a Friday afternoon with news I'd been waiting for. County approval came through. He said, "You're officially qualified for utility operator licensing, and the ownership transfer is approved pending final paperwork." I felt a mixture of relief, excitement, and, honestly, a little fear. In 2 weeks, I'd own the infrastructure that controlled every decorative water feature in our community. The question was, what exactly was I going to do with that power? The weekend before closing, I walked around the community looking at the water features I was about to control. Fountains running at full capacity despite ongoing drought advisories. Sprinkler systems watering already green grass in the middle of the day when evaporation is highest. Decorative streams flowing through landscaped beds that served no purpose except aesthetic appeal. All of it controlled from the facility I was about to own. Monday morning, I was at the county office for the final paperwork. Grant met me there along with a county representative who walked us through the ownership transfer process. "Congratulations, Mr. Brooks," she said, handing me the facility keys and operator license. "You're now the certified owner and operator of Lakeview Dam Company." Grant shook my hand with an expression of profound relief. "Take care of her," he said. "And don't let that woman push you around the way she pushed me." I drove straight to the dam facility and stood in the control room, looking at all those switches and gauges that now responded to my authority. Every fountain in the community, every sprinkler system, every decorative water feature, all controlled from this room, all controlled by me. I pulled up the crumpled fine that had started this whole chain of events. $3,500 for legal fishing had somehow led me to own the water supply of the people who'd tried to destroy my reputation. Day 55 of the county review process, and my phone rang at 8 in the morning. Mr. Brooks, this is Janet from County Utilities. Your ownership transfer has been officially approved. All requirements met, documentation complete. I'd been waiting for that call for nearly 2 months, but hearing it still felt surreal. I was about to become the legal owner of the infrastructure that controlled water flow to every fountain, every sprinkler system, every decorative stream in our community. Wendy's reaction to the news was swift and desperate. Within hours of the county filing becoming public, she attempted one last legal challenge through her attorney. Emergency injunction to prevent ownership transfer due to conflict of interest, the paperwork claimed. But the county had followed proper procedures. I'd met all qualifications and Grant's recommendation carried significant weight with local officials. All legal requirements satisfied, the county responded. Transfer approved is filed. Her last-ditch effort had failed completely. The closing took place on a Wednesday morning at Grant's attorney's office. Stacks of paperwork, wire transfers, liability insurance policies, and operational handover documents. When I signed my name to that final ownership transfer document, I felt the weight of real responsibility settling on my shoulders. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. I was now responsible for critical community infrastructure that people depended on daily. Grant looked 10 years younger as we shook hands. She's all yours now, he said. Operate her legally and safely, and you'll never have problems with the county. The next 3 days were intensive operational training. Grant walked me through every system, every emergency procedure, every routine maintenance requirement. Water pressure management, flow control systems, seasonal adjustments for drought conditions, and coordination protocols with the county water authority. The most important thing he emphasized is maintaining proper documentation. Every shutdown, every maintenance activity, every operational change needs to be recorded and filed with the county. I took detailed notes and practiced operating the control systems until I could manage them confidently. Community awareness of the ownership transfer spread through unofficial channels. Neighbors stopped me at the grocery store asking casual questions about continuity of service and whether there would be any operational changes. The underlying anxiety was obvious. People were realizing that their decorative fountains, their perfect landscaping, and their aesthetic water features were now controlled by the guy they'd voted to ban from the lake. I filed the required 48-hour public notice for routine maintenance inspection of all water distribution systems. County regulations mandated advance notice for any service interruption, even temporary ones. The notice was professional, technical, and gave no indication of my personal motivations. Scheduled maintenance activities may require the temporary suspension of decorative water features. Drinking water systems are not affected. Duration depends on inspection results. Every word had been carefully chosen to meet legal requirements while revealing nothing about my actual intentions. Laura helped me prepare the operational messaging. If you're going to do this, she said, do it professionally. No emotional outbursts, no personal attacks, just clear statements about operational decisions and safety requirements. We drafted responses to anticipated questions, practiced calm explanations of utility management principles, and prepared documentation to support every action I plan to take. The moment you lose your temper or sound petty, you lose credibility, she reminded me. Sunday evening, I stood alone in the dam facility control room, looking at the switches that would either vindicate 15 years of legal lake access or mark me as the petty tyrant Wendy would undoubtedly claim I was. The fine that had started this whole journey was pinned to the bulletin board next to the operational procedures. $3,500 for fishing legally had led me to spend over $300,000 to own the water supply of my accusers. I called my insurance agent to make sure liability coverage was adequate for the ownership transition. Utility operations carry significant responsibility, he explained. Any service disruption needs proper documentation and justification. I assured him that every action would be taken according to county regulations and operational best practices. What I didn't mention was that county regulations gave utility operators broad discretion for maintenance activities and safety inspections. The community app was buzzing with speculation about the pending maintenance inspection. Some residents were concerned about landscaping impact. Others were curious about the new ownership situation, and a few were openly supportive. Maybe now we'll get proper utility management instead of political favoritism. One comment read, I spent Monday morning reviewing every county regulation governing utility operations, emergency shutdown procedures, maintenance scheduling requirements, customer notification protocols, and documentation standards. Everything I planned to do fell within legal operational parameters. The county had given utility operators authority to manage systems according to professional judgment, safety requirements, and resource conservation mandates. My actions would be legally sound, properly documented, and fully justified under existing regulations. Tuesday evening, I called Grant one final time. Any last advice? I asked. He was quiet for a moment. Remember that power is responsibility, he said finally. Whatever you do tomorrow, make sure you can justify it to yourself, to the county, and to the community you serve. Don't let personal feelings compromise professional judgment. It was good advice from someone who had managed that balance for over 20 years. The morning of the shutdown, the crowd was gathered. Wendy was spitting mad, but I was calm. I held up the county paperwork for everyone to see. I wasn't a vengeful homeowner. I was the certified operator. And then, one by one, I flipped the switches. The fountains died. The sprinklers stuttered to a halt. The silence was more powerful than any scream. The look on her face was worth every penny. 7 a.m. Wednesday morning, and I'm standing in the dam facility control room with my hand on the master shutdown switch. Through the windows, I can see residents gathering near the community center. Some with coffee cups, others with cameras, all of them watching the electronic warning boards I had installed the night before. Scheduled maintenance, new dam company ownership, decorative water systems temporarily offline. The county inspector had arrived early to witness the operational transfer, clipboard in hand, making notes about proper procedure compliance. I'd been preparing for this moment for weeks, but the reality of it still felt surreal. I took a deep breath and stepped outside to address the growing crowd. Good morning, everyone. I'm Mason Brooks, and I'm now the certified owner and operator of Lakeview Dam Company. I held up the ownership papers and facility keys for everyone to see, making sure the cameras caught the county approval stamps and official documentation. Some of you know me as the boat shop owner who was fined $3,500 for fishing legally during posted hours. Some of you voted to ban me from the lake based on fake environmental evidence. I paused, letting that sink in. Today, I want to show you what real environmental responsibility looks like. That's when Wendy arrived, storming across the parking area with 3 board members trailing behind her. You can't just buy the dam company because of a fishing fine, she shouted loud enough for everyone to hear. This is illegal. You're holding the community hostage. I turned to face her with the calmest expression I could manage. Actually, Wendy, I can, and I did. Here's the county approval signed and notarized. Here's my utility operator license issued yesterday. I held up the paperwork that made my ownership completely legal and legitimate. Remember that $3,500 fine for environmental damage? I said, addressing the crowd but keeping my eyes on Wendy. Here's my environmental response. I walked back into the control room with everyone following and began flipping switches. One by one, the systems that had run continuously for years began shutting down. The decorative fountains by the clubhouse sputtered and went silent. The sprinkler systems that had been watering already green grass during a drought advisory stopped mid-cycle. The ornamental streams that served no purpose except Wendy's aesthetic preferences slowed to trickles. The crowd reaction was exactly what I had expected. Stunned silence followed by the sound of phones coming out to record what was happening. Some residents looked shocked. Others seemed curious about what would happen next. And a few were clearly enjoying the drama. This shutdown will continue, I announced, until the HOA removes all fraudulent environmental violations from my record and issues a public apology for the character assassination campaign based on fake evidence. Wendy's face had gone pale, then red, then back to pale again. You can't hold the entire community's water hostage over a simple fine, she protested. This is environmental terrorism. I pulled out my phone and showed the crowd the county drought advisory that was still in effect. Actually, this is environmental compliance. County regulations require water conservation during drought conditions. Decorative fountains and non-essential irrigation are specifically mentioned as systems that should be suspended. Let me be very clear, I continued, making sure my voice carried to everyone present. The city drinking water supply is completely unaffected. This shutdown impacts only landscaping and decorative features that waste water during officially declared drought conditions. I pointed to the electronic board that displayed the same message in large, clear letters. Every action I'm taking today is legally authorized, environmentally justified, and professionally documented. The county inspector stepped forward to address the crowd. For the record, Mr. Brooks has followed all proper procedures for this operational transition. His documentation is complete, his qualifications are verified, and his authority to manage these systems is legally established. He looked directly at Wendy. HOA boards do not have operational authority over privately owned utility infrastructure. They are customers, not owners. Laura appeared beside me, having driven over when she heard the commotion from our house. My husband didn't start this fight, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. But he's going to finish it properly. She handed me a folder full of documentation I'd prepared for this moment. Every lie told at the community meeting, every piece of fake environmental evidence, every vote cast based on fabricated information, it's all documented here. Some neighbors began asking questions I'd been hoping to hear. What fake evidence? Called out Mrs. Henderson. What lies at the community meeting? I opened the folder and pulled out side-by-side photos. Wendy's slideshow claiming fishing damage versus the county report identifying the same areas as storm-related erosion. The environmental damage she blamed on my legal fishing was actually caused by severe weather last spring. She knew this, but used the photos anyway to support fraudulent citations. The expert testimony she played during the meeting. I continued pulling out printed pages from the website where she downloaded the generic environmental presentation. Available for purchase online for $99. Generic talking points that could apply to any body of water anywhere. Not specific to our lake, not based on an actual environmental assessment, just stock footage designed to look official. The crowd was getting larger as more residents arrived to see what was happening. Someone had clearly been spreading word through the community that the dam owner was shutting off water and making accusations about HOA fraud. How long will the water stay off? Called out a voice from the back. I looked directly at Wendy before answering. That depends entirely on how quickly the HOA board addresses the fraudulent actions that created this situation. Wendy tried one more desperate play. This is revenge, she shouted. He's punishing the entire community because he got caught breaking environmental regulations. I pulled out the fishing citation sheet issued, now laminated and attached to my operational clipboard. $3,500 for fishing with a legal permit during posted hours in the same spot I fished legally for 15 years. You call that breaking regulations? I call it the most expensive learning experience this community has ever paid for, I said, folding up the citation and putting it back in my pocket. They thought they could destroy my business and reputation with fake environmental claims. Instead, they taught me that real environmental protection means protecting honest residents from predators who abuse their authority. A reporter had arrived from the local newspaper drawn by the unusual story of a homeowner buying a dam company over an HOA dispute. Mr. Brooks, she called out. What's your message to other homeowners dealing with similar situations? I thought for a moment about all the communities where residents were being bullied by HOA boards drunk on petty power. Sometimes you have to buy exactly what they think they control to prove that accountability matters more than authority. The water features had been silent for 30 minutes, and the psychological impact was obvious. Residents who had never thought twice about those constantly running fountains were now acutely aware of their absence. The perfect landscaping that required constant irrigation was already beginning to look stressed in the morning heat. The decorative streams that had provided pleasant background noise were replaced by an almost eerie quiet. By day 2 of the water shutdown, the community pressure was becoming intense. The perfectly manicured common areas were showing visible stress from lack of irrigation. Scheduled events at the clubhouse were being canceled because the decorative fountains that provided ambience were completely silent. Property values were the subject of heated discussions on community message boards as residents worried about the long-term impact of ongoing utility disputes. The HOA board had called 3 emergency meetings in 48 hours, but none of them had produced a public apology or admission of wrongdoing. Wendy's desperation was escalating in ways I hadn't anticipated. Wednesday evening, she called the sheriff's department claiming infrastructure terrorism over a phishing fine. The responding officer was professional and thorough, reviewing all my documentation, inspecting the county approvals, and confirming that every action I'd taken was completely legal. Ma'am, he told Wendy in front of gathered residents, owning and operating utility infrastructure isn't terrorism. It's business. The official validation felt good, but I could see in Wendy's eyes that she was far from finished fighting. Thursday brought the county inspector for the mandatory post-transfer safety check. Standard 72-hour inspection, he explained as we walked through the facility. What he discovered changed everything. Hidden behind the main distribution panel was unauthorized equipment that hadn't appeared on any operational diagrams. Interesting, he said, examining the illegal installation with his flashlight. Someone added a secondary pump system drawing directly from the lake. The unauthorized equipment bypassed all conservation controls and fed water directly to the clubhouse landscaping during drought restrictions. I called Grant immediately. Did you know about any secondary pump system serving the clubhouse? There was a long pause before he answered. No unauthorized pumps were part of the facility when I ran it. If someone installed additional equipment, they did it without permits and without my knowledge. The inspector was already taking photos and making notes for his report. We'll need to review the installation invoices and determine who authorized this work, he told me. That's when the financial investigation began. The inspector requested all documentation related to the clubhouse water system improvements over the past 2 years. When the HOA provided invoices for landscape irrigation upgrades, the numbers immediately raised red flags. This pump system cost the HOA $45,000 according to these invoices, the inspector noted, but comparable systems typically cost $15,000 installed. Where did the extra $30,000 go? The audit trail that followed was devastating for Wendy. Every inflated invoice, every fabricated contractor expense, every budget line item for improvements that existed only on paper. The pattern extended back 18 months and involved systematic embezzlement of HOA funds through a shell company called Clark Maintenance Services that was registered to Wendy's home address. $127,000 in community funds had been stolen through fake projects, inflated costs, and fraudulent billing. Friday afternoon brought the reporter back, this time with a photographer and a much more serious investigation focus. We've reviewed the county inspector's preliminary findings. She said this appears to be a significant financial crime story, not just a utility dispute. When she asked for my comment about the embezzlement discovery, I chose my words carefully. A $3,500 phishing fine just exposed a criminal who was robbing this entire community for years. The community meeting that night was unlike anything our HOA had ever experienced. Standing room only with residents demanding answers about missing funds, fake environmental claims, and systematic financial fraud. When Wendy tried to control the narrative by claiming this was all harassment that started with his phishing fine, the reporter stood up with a folder of financial documents. Mrs. Clark, can you explain why Clark Maintenance Services billed the HOA $45,000 for a $15,000 pump installation? Wendy's public meltdown was both satisfying and deeply uncomfortable to witness. This is all his fault, she screamed, pointing at me across the crowded room. That phishing fine started this harassment campaign. He bought the damn company just to destroy our community. But the reporter pressed harder. What about the $127,000 in missing HOA funds? How do you explain invoices from a company registered to your address for work that was never completed? The county district attorney's office opened a formal investigation Monday morning. Financial crimes unit detectives interviewed residents, reviewed bank records, and examined 3 years of HOA financial statements. The evidence was overwhelming. Systematic embezzlement disguised as community improvements, inflated contractor costs funneled to Wendy's personal accounts, and falsified documentation to cover up the theft. The fake environmental crisis around my fishing citation had been a desperate misdirection to distract from financial crimes she knew would eventually be discovered. Tuesday evening, Wendy Clark was arrested at another emergency HOA meeting charged with embezzlement, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. The handcuffs clicking shut in front of the community she'd terrorized with fake environmental emergencies was poetic justice I couldn't have scripted better myself. "This is harassment," she shouted as the detective led her away. All because of a fishing fine. The detective's response was professional and final. "Ma'am, this is because of financial crimes. The fishing fine just helped us find them." The community's reaction to Wendy's arrest was a mixture of shock, anger, and embarrassment. Residents realized they had been funding her personal expenses while she systematically destroyed the reputations of honest neighbors who asked inconvenient questions. The environmental evidence they'd believed, the expert testimony they'd trusted, the urgent need for community action against fishing violations, all of it had been elaborate misdirection to cover up systematic theft. I found myself in the unusual position of being both vindicated and responsible for critical community infrastructure during a time of significant upheaval. The water systems were still shut down, pending resolution of the HA's acknowledgement of wrongdoing. But the discovery of financial crimes had completely changed the community's perspective on who the real environmental threat had been. Several residents approached me privately to apologize for believing Wendy's fabricated evidence and supporting the vote to ban me from lake access. The reporter's investigation had grown into a front-page story that drew attention from regional media outlets. "Homeowner buys dam company over HOA fine exposes embezzlement ring" was the headline that appeared in newspapers across 3 counties. The story captured public imagination as a perfect example of grassroots justice defeating corrupt authority, even though the reality had been much messier and more expensive than the headline suggested. What made the story even more compelling was the systematic nature of Wendy's fraud. This wasn't just petty theft. It was a sophisticated scheme that had operated successfully for over a year and might have continued indefinitely if she hadn't made the mistake of targeting someone with the resources and determination to fight back effectively. The FBI Financial Crimes Unit arrived on a Thursday morning. 3 black SUVs in the dam facility parking lot, which made our community dispute suddenly feel much larger and more serious than anyone had anticipated. "Mr. Brooks," the lead agent said, "your documentation of harassment and financial irregularities has helped us identify connections to similar schemes in multiple communities across the county." What had started as my personal fight against one corrupt HOA president had accidentally exposed a criminal network that had been operating successfully for years. Wendy's arrest had triggered a review of other HOA boards where she'd served as a consultant or board member. The FBI discovered a pattern of financial fraud involving fabricated maintenance contracts, inflated project costs, and systematic embezzlement disguised as community improvements. "Your fishing fine fight just broke open a multi-community embezzlement ring," the agent explained. "The documentation you provided about harassment tactics and misdirection helped us understand how these schemes operate." My role transformed overnight from aggrieved homeowner to key witness in a federal investigation. The timeline I'd created documenting Wendy's escalating harassment, the financial records Laura had compiled showing budget discrepancies, even the crumpled fishing citation that had started everything, all became evidence in a case that would ultimately involve 12 HOA boards and over $2 million in stolen community funds. The emergency HOA meeting called to address Wendy's arrest, and the federal investigation was standing room only. Residents who had voted to ban me from the lake 6 weeks earlier now stood up to offer public apologies for believing fabricated evidence and supporting fraudulent accusations. "We should have asked more questions," said Tom Richardson, a board member who had enthusiastically supported the environmental protection vote. "We trusted authority instead of examining evidence." I stood at the podium in the same community center where Wendy had presented her fake environmental slideshow and addressed neighbors who were seeing their community leadership in an entirely new light. That $3,500 fine taught this community about real environmental protection. I said, protecting residents from predators who abuse their authority and steal from the people they're supposed to serve. The applause was genuine and sustained, but I felt more relief than triumph. The water restoration ceremony took place on a Saturday morning with county officials, community residents, and media representatives gathered at the dam facility. As the certified owner and operator of this utility system, I announced I'm implementing new policies based on transparency, conservation, and democratic input from the community we serve. I flipped the switches that brought the fountains back to life, restarted the irrigation systems with conservation-compliant schedules, and restored the decorative streams that had been silent for 2 weeks. The business impact of the whole ordeal had been better than I'd feared. The story of a boat shop owner buying a dam company to fight HOA corruption had attracted customers from across the region. "You're the guy who stood up to the crooked HOA" became a common greeting from new clients who drove considerable distances to support a business that had fought back against systematic abuse. Revenue was actually up 30% from the previous year. Federal prosecutors offered Wendy a plea agreement for years in federal prison, full restitution to all victims, and cooperation in the investigation of other corruption schemes she'd helped implement. Her assets, including the expensive home renovations funded by stolen HOA money, were seized to compensate communities she'd defrauded. The house that had been upgraded with embezzled funds was sold with proceeds distributed to affected homeowners. The county passed comprehensive HOA reform legislation 6 months later. Financial transparency requirements, limits on fine amounts, mandatory due process for violations, and independent oversight of all community funds. The Brooks Act, as local media dubbed it, became a model for HOA reform across the state. The legislation was named not for heroic action, but for accidentally uncovering systematic corruption through stubborn refusal to accept obvious injustice. I kept the dam company and hired a professional operator to handle day-to-day management. The profits fund community lake improvements that are voted on democratically with complete financial transparency and public oversight. The fishing fine that started this whole journey is framed in my office, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that sometimes the most expensive lessons teach the most important truths about standing up to bullies who think authority means accountability doesn't apply to them. Sometimes the best response to a $3,500 lie is $325,000 worth of truth, I told the reporter, who returned a year later to write a follow-up story. The community is healthier now with genuine environmental protection, transparent governance, and residents who understand that democracy requires participation, not just trust. And yes, I still fish from that same dock every weekend legally and peacefully, exactly as I always should have been able to do. Stories like this remind us that justice sometimes comes with a price tag, but accountability is always worth the investment. At Echo Stories, we believe that standing up to corruption and abuse of power creates echoes that reach far beyond our own communities. These echoes inspire others to fight back against injustice, to demand transparency from those in authority, and to remember that ordinary people can create extraordinary change when they refuse to accept obvious wrongs. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you that one person's courage can expose systematic corruption and protect entire communities, please hit that like button. Your support helps these stories reach people who need to hear them. People who might be facing their own battles against corrupt authority and wondering if fighting back is worth the cost. Have you ever taken control of something your bullies thought they owned? Tell me what happened next in the comments below. Thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next video where we'll explore another story of ordinary people doing extraordinary things when pushed beyond reasonable limits.